What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Thank you for checking out this episode of the Keep Klimbing podcast. We're back today. Why don't you introduce the topic for us today?
Oh, you sure?
I want you to do it.
All
It's
right.
your topic. It's a great topic.
Well, this is all the stuff I look at when I always go to your website and I'm always looking at different things and seeing what's going on because to me, it's part of baseball. That's what I do, with Youth Baseball Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And we're heading down the stretch. We're heading to districts.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was interesting because we got to see a young man named Carter Martin pitch last night. Well, not last night, last week. In a championship game, had 13 Ks, one hit, shutout, and just laser focused. And I always think about things like this, and coming off our topic last week, I was looking at this thought process and I said, how do you build a routine? Do high school players, is that a thought process to them? You've gone through this whole process starting in high school up through college to the professional level. And, you always hear about, back in the day, it was Nolan Ryan, just the routine he had.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Nolan Ryan would go in after a game and lift weights.
Yep.
And he did it, that's what he did.
Yep. Clayton
Clayton Kershaw is famous,
Yep.
For his routine. These are guys that I follow, whatnot. Is that something that, as a high school player, how do you get them to start that thought process?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of buy-in that, to be honest with you, I think as coaches, we can tell them till we're blue in the face, but there's only so much I think you can do on that front, right. And, I shared a personal experience of mine earlier too, that just from a sheer maturity or state of mind, that high school is such a weird in-between time where some players are getting really good. They're really pursuing going to play in college. They're building their skills. They're building their stuff. They're building, they're maturing a ton, internally, emotionally, mentally, and emotionally. But it's sandwiched in between this time where middle school or whatever, they could roll out of bed and go play 3 games in a day, And then if you go play in college, everything's very much a business, regimented, and very scripted for you most of the time, right? So we're kind of in this weird in between time when we look at this time frame for a pitcher that they're probably physically getting to the point where they're gifted enough and it's necessary that they get on a better routine to help kind of either take them to the next level or minimize their risk of injury or a bunch of different factors, to be honest with you. But the dynamic is are they mentally and emotionally ready? Because there's a lot of other factors into it where they're their friends or their teammates or their teams that they're on aren't very structured and regimented, So if you dropped a kid that had the aptitude to really be structured and regimented in an environment that's really not, how would you expect him to be that way?
That's tough, isn't it?
And operate that way.
I never thought about that. Right.
And that's kind of what we help players do, our business helps players do that in the off season, during the season, any time of the year, because there's development objectives for every single month of the year, and some of them can just be rest and recovery for sure, but how you're going about your rest and recovery can also help separate you, just how you go about your bullpens and your routines, but I think the dynamics of that is really all just so fluid and finicky and individual from person to person that it really depends on I think who you are as a person. It depends, I think, on some of the mental maturity things for younger players. And I also think it's very impactful of their environment, the people that you're around, you kind of become type of thing. And that dynamic is that's true, that's really true, for adults and especially for younger teenagers, so.
I think it's interesting too, because when you start talking about it, okay, and just all these different variables, from the beginning of the high school season, a lot of these kids and we've talked about, I think this is an interesting process. One of the better pitchers in the state, we know, over in Jeff City, Jordan Martin was playing basketball.
Yep.
Deep into that.
Yep.
How do you set yourself in that motion?
That's
What's
tough.
that process?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure there are plenty of kids that we could talk about that do that. So I never thought about it in that process when you look at those things. So, but at this point, when you've got a kid, and the mental emotional part of it, I think, is the biggest thing, because I think that's the divider. And we're getting to crunch time, right?
Yeah.
Can you handle the big moment emotionally?
Yeah.
And I think that's where I've seen pitchers, high school kids, seniors even, get overwhelmed by that.
Sure, yeah.
And do you think that building the routine helps create a better mental state in that respect?
I think so. I think when done appropriately, your routine not only helps you with your physical performance, but it also helps you with your mental preparation. And I think that we've had similar conversations with this about, like, your routine also really helping you deal with adversity. Because if I've built a good routine and I trust my good routine, then after a good day or after a bad day, I'm going to show up the next day and do the exact same thing, right? So that gives you some like peace and comfort in that. Now, if you've not developed a good routine, you have nothing really to fall back on, and that's typically when you feel on ice skates, or you start like searching for answers. Like the people who are like really confident and convicted in that. They know who they are. They know what they need. A lot of people would say, well, how do they know what they need? Well, they've spent a lot of time thinking about it, evaluating it. They've probably got people in their corner helping with, build those routines, either through experience, whether that be like, mental side of the game things on like how to deal with that adversity or how to deal with the preparation, but also on like physical side of things, and both of those things are equally important for sure. I think that, like, when you really look under the hood at like some of the high performers, you understand how much time they at least spend thinking and preparing on the mental side of the game as they do the physical side of the game, because you can't really see that. That's not something that ever really gets seen. And I think the only times where people do really see it is like the video clips that you'll see of Clayton Kershaw going through dry reps the day before his start that surfaces on the internet somewhere, right? Like,
right.
Yeah, that's a very good look at that. But I'll tell you what, that's probably like the very tip of the iceberg of that guy's mental preparation for the entire week. How much video he was watching, video of himself, video of the hitters, how much like scouting report work he was doing, how much like mental visualization work he was doing, how much like of a post-game recap and what do I need to focus physically on this week. Like all of those things, like make up the mental makeup or mental preparation, like from a week-to-week, game-to-game standpoint for pitchers, that like you never see those and you never hear about those. Even if I was your teammate, I would not have a visual of what that looks like. So it's extremely hard to quantify. You walk into a clubhouse, how much of the time all of these guys are spending working on their mental game. All you're going to see is the 15 dry reps that Clayton Kershaw did in the bullpen the day before his start. And like, yeah, that's cool, but you also don't need to do that. I've seen people do dry reps and I've done them before and like be totally misguided. You know what I mean? So, I think a lot of that stuff, like what you do in your routine is important. And I think identifying those things are really important. But I think the attention to detail and how you do them is actually most important, right? Because if I just had like I'll give you an example that's very, premier pitching, focus, that like if I gave you a training program that was like totally individualized and made just for you and the way your shoulder and core and hips and body worked, and you did it with 50% conviction, and I went and downloaded one off the internet and I freaking crushed it, I'm definitely going to get better than you, and like, so how you go about doing it is kind of like the prereq for success. And if we can get to that point where we got high energy, great attitude, great conviction, behind what you're doing, and then you put a really good plan in front of somebody, that's where things like start to snowball, but thinking that I'm going to get some type of plan and then I'm going to, half-heartedly do it is, you're missing the point.
The two things, and I thought were interesting, as you say there, because the old adage And I don't know, in a lot of conversations that I've had, especially with you and what you're talking about with the body movement, I love this aspect of it. I look at things from an outside perspective and listen to a lot of different thoughts about, and here's the thing, people, I think there's a big difference between thought and opinion.
Yeah.
Can you always separate them? Not necessarily sometimes when you hear it, but there's a big difference between thought and opinion. Somebody's opinion, it may not be well thought out.
Yep.
But a thought is what should be well, I guess the lawyerly term was it Vardar or whatever that is. You really go through it. You pick it apart and put it back together.
Intentional.
Exactly. And that's what I see here. And this is what I do when I look at this. I listen to a lot of different thoughts on the subject, and to, the old adage of muscle memory, and okay, yeah, whatnot. But I think the biggest part of this, and I've believed this a long time, is when the body follows the mind. So if your mind is not able to function at a capacity when as you're saying, I like the visualization part. Can you visualize throwing where you want to throw it, see it if you're doing dry reps? So what does that routine mean? It means that you have to be, how many 17-year-olds can really focus their intent in their mental attitude towards that type of thought process? And I think that's the separator, isn't it?
Yeah. I think the details within that for the players and maybe how they go about like accomplishing that, essentially.
Sure.
Because that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, how do we get more people from this side of the to this?
Yeah.
Right. Like,
yeah.
And
will they? And I think that's got to be a willingness on the player's part
100%.
to go to that place.
Yeah, 100%.
Because everybody's at the McDonald's hanging out, and
yeah,
I got to go over here and do this.
Right. At the end of the day, we have to accept as coaches or as parents or whatever that they're going to have to make a decision for themselves.
Yeah.
And truth be told, it's way more complex than that, because it's not a one-time decision. It's actually a daily decision to do the right thing, and even within the day, there's hundreds of decisions within that day that they need to make. And that's a tough thing to do. And I would expect that as they get older and they get more mature, they're able to handle making better decisions,
Right.
obviously. So
that's the goal, right?
Yeah, I mean, you gotta encourage them. You definitely gotta explain to them what they're actively choosing by not doing it. You're choosing to prepare for failure. Like right now, I think would be a good, if like an accountable type of conversation. Because I think what a lot of people think is that it's not a good decision or a bad decision. It's just like a non-decision. And that's really not the case, right? We talked about it earlier of just looking at everything as either I'm improving or I'm not improving. I'm growing or I'm dying. There really is no staying in the middle on that. And in those non-decisions, right? Or in the times where they feel like they're remaining neutral, that it's actually a step backwards, because everybody that they want to compete against just made a good decision and took a step forward, right?
Yeah.
So every single time, and I think that's the way that they got to look at it, from their sleep and recovery and nutrition, to their physical training programs, to their mental preparation, and all of those things. And all you're really trying to do is just take as many little bitty steps forward as consistent as possible, knowing that this is really hard to do. You're gonna get beat, you're gonna fail, you're gonna do whatever. And at the end of the day, most of my thoughts and conversations for these athletes, families, and players is just that at the end of the day, this will be over for you at some point. And you wanna be able to walk away and say man, I did everything that I could, and I'm so at peace with what I did and what God put in front of me right now, that I executed with what He gave me to do, and I did it faithfully, and I did it diligently, and that
Right.
whatever comes next,
Right.
I'll be okay,
Right.
and because that's coming for you, whether it's this year or next year or 10 years from now. and
they'll tell you you're done, right?
yeah, and I think, like you talk about it with a younger player and it doesn't really resonate very good. You talk about it with a 22-year-old, like, professional player, and I think it really does because you feel that, like, I mean, even a college player, right? Like you feel that much more, like as you get older, that the reality is like, yeah, I mean, the more time you can spend thinking about baseball specifically in that light, and it's also way bigger than baseball, mind you, right? Like
I agree.
that if you think
Yeah.
about it, and if you spent more time thinking about that when you were 15 or 16 about baseball, you would look at it much different. Like you would look at it much different. And I think that's the perspective that
Yeah.
like we have like
Right.
now, and only time can really give you that, that like that's difficult. And so back to the question of like, well, how do we get more people to like make better decisions? Man, I mean, it's through constant communication and education as their coaches. It's through like accountability and encouragement through like maybe some of their difficult times, whether that's because they're making poor decisions or maybe they just failed physically and maybe they're a super, high work ethic and they're experienced like a long duration of failure. That's extremely hard to deal with too. I know people that have, I mean, maybe it's not even failure on the field. Maybe it's a perceived failure. Go back to our recent topic of just like on-field success versus like next level opportunities, that like, maybe it's a junior college kid right now who's hit an amazing bunch of homers. He's worked his butt off and it's his second year at junior college and he doesn't have any 4-year schools calling him, wanting him to come play for the school. That's super deflating.
Yeah, buddy.
That's
Yeah,
super deflating.
absolutely.
And you're that player and like you're crushed. I totally get it. Like that is all you feel like you've been doing that work for, was for that opportunity. You went out and did everything that you possibly could. And look, I'm going to tell you, I've been there too. You did everything that you could from a work ethic standpoint, from a sleep and recovery standpoint. You went out and performed on the field.
Right.
And then you still didn't get that next set opportunity. That's like, man, that's so crushing in that moment, especially for a younger player to deal with, that at the end of the day, the only way you can wrap your head around that as the athlete is that, I did everything I could. I did everything I could.
I love that point.
The only thing that's not in my control as a baseball player is the opportunities that you get. What you do with them is in your control. So like, even if you're on your team right now and wish you were pitching more in the postseason or whatever, right?
Yeah.
If that's you in a junior college environment, if that's you later on down in your career, like you don't get any say about what your opportunities look like.
No.
Someone else does. Someone
Right.
always controls that for you, no matter what level that you're at. All you can do is do the best with the opportunity you have in front of you. And then at the end of the day, we have to be willing to accept, I did what I came here to do and I have no control what you can. And not, don't worry about what you can't. And it's really hard to do that, but at the end of the day, you'll be able to lay your head down on that pillow and accept that like this just wasn't in the cards for me, but it wasn't within my own doing. Then the alternative of the guy who was uber talented that didn't make the right decisions, that guy's going to have regrets for the rest of his life. And the player who gave it everything he had that didn't get the opportunities because of things outside of their control, like won't, he just won't.
Well, and I love the way you phrase that because, you're good. You are. I don't care. It's crushing.
Yeah.
But I think if that person has that mental attitude and that's the work and the things you put in, you're going to take that same work ethic to whatever else you're doing in your life. Point. And it's got to be, but you got to learn how to do that.
Yeah.
And that's the key. We talk, I've seen it hanging up there. You go over to the sports barn, they have trust the process, up there, and fantastic, right? I think it's cool. It's not that, but now you have to define the process. Mm-hmm. And that's the key for, I think, these kids is understanding, well, what's my process? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And I think that's where, in a lot of the things you guys have done over at Premier with your methods and the things and the apps and the things that you've done, it's beginning to outline an understanding of what that process looks like for you.
Yeah, right.
And how you have to first start with your mental attitude towards this process. Here's your process.
Right.
We can help you build this, but you've got to be willing to put that there and make it a priority in who you are as a person.
Yeah. And I think that like, ultimately that's the hardest part for any coach is that, you know, two different sides. We end up saying stuff like this all the time. If you can put so-and-so's brain on so-and-so's arm, you know, like they'd be a really good baseball player. And you know, the same certainly was true about me at different times in my life, you know, like it's common. But you know, the reality is that you end up looking at people who are like uber talented that maybe mentally aren't as dedicated and dialed in and saying like, what if? And then you look at people who are less talented that are very dialed in and you say like, man, he's really like maybe outperforming his talent level. And he's really like carrying himself because of how intentional and detailed and thoughtful he is. You know, just to seek out help where he needs help, but then also like once he gets information to like actually do and apply something with it.
I think it's, and the other part of this, you know, we talk about the process, building routines to set yourself in motion to be successful. That's a lot to say. Okay. And I think these are the conversations that get left behind because the conversation is, did you see that guy's pull down the other day? I don't care.
Yeah. Right.
I honestly, from my perspective, what I do, and I understand there's recruiting services out there, and that's what people do, and that's fantastic, sure. and all those things. And kudos to that kid, you know.
Yeah, right.
But in the large scope of things, that one pull down, great.
Yeah, it doesn't matter at all.
Okay,
right? Yeah.
But now, what have you do? What do you do? So you get the attention. But now, you know this as well as I do, then the scrutiny becomes intensified.
Sure.
Because that person comes talking to you, okay, what does he do, coach? Hey, how's he in school? How's this? How's it? The conversations become that whole process, and then all of a sudden it starts breaking you down as a person. Now we're into this situation where the pull down is fine. That's we like that. But how are you going to be able to replicate that, do that? What is in the process that's going to give you the opportunity in that, right?
Yep. Well, and I think the ill-advised, less mature, less understanding of maybe the whole like broad scope of like what you're trying to achieve within all that, like would probably overvalue, you know, really any type of performance metric, but especially like a peak performance metric, like a pull down would be. Right. It's really not apples to apples to success in the field or even just pitching velocity in general. So, you know, that thought process is already kind of skewed and misguided. Right. But if you're looking at that as the player or as the coach or as the parent, you know, I think what you can do is you can look at that and like have like little process oriented benchmarks that get you to your outcome goals. And what I mean by that, what's your outcome goal? They can be a lot of different things. Okay. Outcome goal could be, I want to go play in college. Outcome goal could be, I want to make all conferences here. Outcome goal could be, I want to have a, you know, ERA in the 3s. Outcome goal could be, I want to throw 92. Outcome goal could be a lot of different things. What we need to have is like process oriented goals that help us take steps day by day, week by week, month by month to get to those big picture goals to help guide and lead us to where we want to go. That now take your scenario and put that in there. I want to, you know, play Division I and throw 92, you know, a 95 mile an hour pull down is a pretty good process oriented goal that when viewed as a process oriented goal, it's a step in the stairs or in the ladder, but like, it's really not what I'm worried about. But yeah, it's a nice step of like a part of that journey to get to the process or to get to the outcome, right? That like when viewed that way, you can be like, oh, cool. That was a cool feat for me to get to. It was a part of my journey of getting ultimately to where I want to go. But just sheerly, simply with that type of thought process, language, verbiage, thought about like that, it just is like such a small, minimal thing that I had to do to get to ultimately where I want to go. Because if that's like your end of the tunnel, light at the end of the tunnel, then what you go do after that is just like awry, like,
Yes.
but if it's a piece to the journey, it's not viewed as like the peak of the mountain. It's still on the upswing of the mountain, actually.
Yep.
And keeps it all in better context. But now I'll say and double back that, like, depending on what your goals are now. If your goals are to be all conference and have a ERA in the 3s or below the 3s or whatever, right? Like a good ERA, then you throwing a certain pull down probably doesn't matter that much in that. You know what I mean? You're going to have probably more goals of pitch execution and breaking pitches. And, you're going to probably have more things that are like very game to game outcome driven thing that, like, okay, well, I can't give up more than 2 runs a game. Then if that's like my goal, you do some quick math on 2 runs a game on 5 to 6 innings pitched, then, you get above a 3. So like, depending on what your outcome goals specifically are, and typically what I'll say is that, like, most pitchers, I was very goal-oriented. I wrote them down every year from the time I was like 15 or something, that, like, I loved it.
That's a starting point, right?
100%, but I'll also say that, like, I mean, I was just the type of person who liked to write down a list of things I need to do and cross them off as I went through it. That, like, I was just kind of that way, wired that way from the get-go, to stay organized on things. That, like, to take a kid that's like super unorganized and teach him to, like, really be that way, I think it's extremely difficult if the player isn't bought in on that being important for him to achieve what he wants to achieve. Now, you can example it for him. You can talk to him till you're blue in the face about how player XYZ that you've had that has come through here, and you want to be like them, or here's what they did.
Here's the tools.
Yeah. And, like, here's what it's supposed to look like, because I've seen a lot of people do it, like, but at the end of the day, like we don't get to make those decisions for our kids, for our players, for anybody. And that's one of the hardest things of, like, trying to lead people through that process is, like, at some point they got to make their own decisions, and that's hard for us to deal with, but it also, I think, as the coach, as the teacher, as the leader in that example, like, to lay your head down on the pillow at night, to know that you told them everything you could tell them, you taught them everything you could teach them, all those different things, that, like, you invested everything you had into that person, that ultimately at that point it's out of my hands. I can't really do much with it after that, and that's hard to deal with too, like that's hard to deal with too. And a similar thing to the player who did everything he could and didn't get the outcome he wanted. Like, got to be able to lay your head down and say, like, I did everything I could.
The influence, we had this conversation a little bit. We were talking before we did the show, and we were talking about how can you influence, and I believe you can, and I think that's the way you do it. And you have to, as a coach or a mentor of anything in that respect, you have to give the tools, no matter what they do with them.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
Here's the tools.
You have to expect that there's going to be a very wide application of what they
exactly do. And to the player,
you're, like, setting yourself
hey,
up
buddy,
for frustration.
I can only point you in the right direction. You're going to have to be the person, the individual. Yep. Here's the process. These things are successful. Right. And not to mention, you can show, here's the success, here's the success, here's success, here's success. Are you willing to put yourself in that place? And that's where it ends up.
You build routines like that, right?
Right.
To get to your point, that's how you build routines. They kind of revolve around goals and goals and outcomes. And then we backtrack off of that to where we say, okay, like, if these are your goals, then here's what we need to get to. Here's pieces of this development process. If you want to throw 95 on the mound, you probably better be able to throw 95 in a pull down, and it's probably going to come a little bit, you know what I'm saying? Or like whatever, right? Like
if you're throwing 82 on a pull down, 95 is not your cards right now.
So those things though help kind of developmentally lay out stepping stones for you to ultimately get to your big picture goals. Which, without big picture goals, you have no, like, without a vision of, like, what you want to do, where you want to go, you have no initial steps to get there, and then when, in the right context, and I'll say that, especially, pull downs are funny because I've done pull downs my whole life.
Right.
Okay. Not with a radar gun and not into a net. You know, we'd play long toss, and then on the way back in, we'd crow hop and we'd throw them as hard as we could on the line. And I was just trying to throw them as hard as I could, but I wouldn't have called them a pull down, you know, like I just was playing long toss. That's just what we did. Right. Like, and people have done that forever in baseball, and it's part of building arm strength, and it's all good. You know, like now the context, I think, of all those things is with training facilities and radar guns and whatever has gotten, you know, skewed, manipulated, because a lot of people just want to like post what the radar numbers like look like. And I think the baseball people who know better, you know, but what I'll say is that like we should be celebrating those wins throughout that development process.
Oh, absolutely.
When I know you know that, you know, but like there's a fine line, there's a balance between like, this is not the destination.
Right.
But this is still something to be proud of because it's part of your journey to get to where you want to go.
Just don't make that the
outcome.
Right.
Like it's part of the journey. It's part of the process. It's not the outcome. And we have to take a mature enough look at this to say like, that's cool. Good for you. I'm proud of you. You know, like that's great. But it's also, and I tell kids this all the time. I was actually just talking about this yesterday, that like, you know, you roll through February and it's like showcase season for high school guys and prep them for the thing, and they want to see all their new velocities and like whatever for the year. And I tell all of them the same thing, which is I think fantastic for all of them to hear, is that like, if this is the best bullpen you throw this year, we did something terribly wrong.
Oh,
you know, don't come out here and blow the doors off. And if this is the best you do, like this is still so early in this process throughout the entire year that the best you look should be in freaking June when things matter.
Championship,
you know?
baby.
So, right? Like, or summer ball. And I think taking that like mentality of like, I'm going to build all the way throughout this, because too many of them, and it's because of I'm going to say like, as a baseball society, you know, like the picture that we've painted for them is that like, well, we're going to do all this training in the off season, and then we're going to do this showcase, and then it's like season time. You know, so it like paints this picture of like, oh, real high volume of training, and then like we're gonna peak, and we're gonna do our showcase, and we're gonna, you know, get all of our numbers, and then we're gonna get into the season. And then, I mean, I'm sure all of these kids, they haven't thrown one bullpen with a radar gun on them. They throw probably most of their games, and depending on the team or the coach or whatever, some of the players may not even have radar guns on them during the season. So like it totally flips from like totally performance metric workout training driven to just competition, and that's super flawed for them as well. Like it's all got to be a balance, which to your point, the pull down season in January or whatever, when looked at through the lens of like, you know, a balance of, you know, training and competition, you understand that means less, and vice versa. The player who's not picked up or done any type of training, and he's just rolling out there and picking up the ball when the coach tells him to go, and he's just pitching right now, he understands more, you know, or in that light, I think as the player or the coach, we understand more that like how important the training program is to coincide with everything that you're doing during the season, because both of those are like improper ways to go about, you know, your development as a baseball player, you know?
Right.
So
because, you know, okay, the guy, the college guy sees the pull down on the video, and great, fantastic. He hits 93. Ooh. Well, maybe I got to take a look at this kid, right? Goes out to the ball game and he walks the bases loaded all the time.
Sure. Yeah.
And these are things that, can you work with a kid and whatnot? But then what's the beginning of that thought process for the recruiter or whatnot? Yeah. How much is it too much work?
Yeah.
To put into that situation at this point?
Yeah, 100%. A very real scenario that a lot of people deal with too is that, you know, take that scenario, kid threw 93 in his pull down, and then he comes out to, because both of these are true and both of these are knocks against you. Okay. You come out and you're throwing 90, 93 and you're throwing them off the backstop. Coach doesn't want that, right? Vice versa. You come out and you're 84 to 85 now, and maybe you pitch okay.
Yeah.
Depending on the level, coach may not want that either. So it's a fine line of like balancing all those things that like when you look at development in a full kind of like pie chart of like time that you have, and you start dividing it up, you know, like, you know, competitive reps are just as important as your lifting programs, is just as important as your throwing programs, is just as, you know, like your nutrition and your sleep and your recovery, like all of these things go into becoming better as a baseball player, that when one area is very neglected, you take out one piece of that, your performance is really going to suffer. Now, it may not suffer in like a very micro view, and I think that's where we could get this distorted a little bit, is that like, I could not lift this whole week and go out and throw 7-inning shutout and everything's going to be fine. But if I keep doing that week after week, like my performance is going to diminish. Whether maybe not my ability to get the players out, and that's not necessarily what I mean, but like you could expect like velocity decreases, you could expect potential like higher injury risk, you could all of the things that come with a good training program, and then vice versa. You could totally say that like, too much thought and focus on pull downs or, non like game applicable metrics or things or details, right? That like too much of a focus on that has us throwing balls off the backstop and also, totally defeats the purpose of getting the hitters out, So a very good, healthy balance of those things is what a player needs to hear, right?
Yes.
Like constantly, like telling them the truth, being truthful with like the evaluation of like where they're at with everything and what they need to do to get to where they want to go for their goals, and then helping them line out like daily plans or objectives to get there, and then at some point, it's up to them to decide that this is really what I want to do and this is what I want to dedicate myself to, and if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right.
Let's think, because I think I love these conversations because, and please like, subscribe, hit the dinger, you know the drill, because these are the conversations that I think are more real. I love the big stuff. It's fun. Yeah. It's fun, and it should be fun. Yeah. At that point, the pull down when you put up, that should be fun. Yeah, and as you said, celebrated and whatnot, but understand, make sure that's just part of the picture. Yep. It's just that one snapshot in the whole framework of the painting.
That's right.
Okay? Because I hear, and I'll bring this up, and I don't mind sharing this stuff because I love these things. And this is the way over the past however many years, and Kevin Mulder's been great contributor on Youth Baseball Midwest Talk, Baseball Talk. And he's always talked about it. He goes, look, you folks, you have to understand, I'm looking at projectable kids. I'm looking at kids that I think are going to be, that's his job. Right. So, when you see kids, you go, how come that kid? I saw, it's just about projectability, those things. That's his business. Mm-hmm. All right. So you have to understand that that's what you're dealing with. So it changed a lot about the way I looked at things. Mm-hmm. This past Sunday, a couple Sundays ago, we were at the ballpark, 14U, and I always liked the 14U part of it. I saw a young man in the championship game, Central Illinois Swing. Mm-hmm. Head coach is Josh Campbell. Really liked him, liked his conversation. And this young man, Tony Matthews, didn't throw overpowering. Mm-hmm. But as you watched him pitch, you understood, you started to see that he understood what he wanted to do, how he wanted to get outs, and he understood the thought process of how he threw off his fastball, how he threw off his changeup, his curveball. Mm-hmm. He really had a plan and an understanding of how to do that. Mm-hmm. And a good team. This was AAA baseball. And this young man went out and threw 7 innings, gave up 1 run. I think it was like maybe 6 hits. The best stat of the day. He did not walk 1 batter. Yep. A 14-year-old, I mean, you've pitched. How hard is it not to walk anybody?
Yeah, oh yeah. Holy smokes, yeah. You start thinking about it more, it makes it even harder.
And so what I started looking at, and this is what I mean. Now, do I think this is a kid that, you look at projecting wise and whatnot, and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, he's not throwing hard in the sense of what we think of in that respect. Right. But he had an understanding of it. And to me, this is where I would say to kids, this is where you understand the process. Take it to however far you can get. And you never know, something may change this, that you don't know. There's the outlier and things like that. But for the most part, are we taking these things as learning opportunities for who we are as people? And I think that's what I think I like more about what you guys do over there as well, because it's not just about, you're there. This is the outcome, right? This is the goal. But in the end, the process is about building a mindset that understands how to be successful.
Yeah. Right.
And I don't think we do that enough.
Yeah. Amen. No, amen. I think that a lot of that too, a lot of that falls on the coach, no doubt. Culture and environment of growth and development, and winning, I think is very important. I think a lot of that goes on at the home too.
Yeah.
But I think us as parents, as dads, as men, that like we're teaching and developing and growing character, like all of those things, like again, like yeah, you might see it show up on the baseball field, but like we said earlier, it's like way bigger than that. That like at the end of the day, like we do whatever it takes to get the job done that's in front of us. And I think that's probably the biggest life lesson that like we're talking about right here is that like, okay, you decided this is what you want to do. We're going to go for it. And there's all gas, no brakes, and whatever it takes to get it done, we do. And then at the end of the day, win or loss, everything that I did, you also have to be able to handle loss or failure with respect and class as a man too. And that's a character trait.
Absolutely.
So that's what it is. And that's what we're trying to teach the kids to do, and like, it like, we love baseball and it shows up in baseball. It's much bigger than that, but yeah, I mean, you want my opinion then as Brett, the baseball player?
No, I want your thought.
Baseball coach. You want my thought on what's it going to take for you to be successful as a baseball player? It's the exact same things, like it's the exact same things. So yeah, you could zoom way out and say that, but I can also zoom way in and say like today, you got to wake up and you got to make some really good decisions, better decisions than all of your competition is going to be if that's who you want to be,
I like it.
So every single one of those, there's an opportunity to chalk up small little wins. And, you start doing that week after week, month after month, then you start to see it on the field. Now, the hardest thing I think with all that is like you start to make those decisions. Very rarely do you start to see immediate results of what you're looking for out on the field. You wind up making good decisions, taking some lumps, and then being like, oh, poor me, why am I not winning now? It's like, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. And there's really just because you work really hard, I think that's one of the hardest things. I tell a lot of high school kids, especially these days, that in high school, you can beat a lot of people by just showing up, because there's a lot of people that aren't going to show up. And even if they physically show up, I mean more of like mentally showing up and being focused and energetic, right?
Agreed.
Like show up mentally and physically, okay? But then you're going to get into this time frame or this competition level of like, okay, now everyone shows up. How are you going to separate yourself? And that's hard, like because at the end of the day, I've seen so many people, I've felt this way at times in my own life, is that, man, you can work so hard and not see the results that you want. And that's just the reality. That's life,
Yeah.
And I think dealing with that is tough. And I think baseball can teach us that and give us some first tastes of that. That certainly was my first taste of it, is that like, there's just no guarantee of success for doing some of these work ethic type of things, but I can guarantee you that you're not going to get it if you don't do it. But there's no guarantee that you will if you do. That's tough. It's tough to swallow.
Absolutely, man.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for checking out this episode. I hope it made you think. I hope, if you think it applies to somebody send them a link. Like the only reason we spend the time doing all of this is to help people, to help players at all ages. I think especially the younger ages. Yeah. I really think about like what would I have wanted to tell 15 or 16-year-old Brett, and maybe shake him a little bit too and be like, hey, come on, man. So I really hope this makes an impact. I hope that if there's just one person out there that this resonates with that it can help you. So like, comment, subscribe, drop any type of stuff you guys have, in the comment sections, questions, future topics. We'd love to talk about them with you, and we'll see you next time.